Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 things that happened on the 4th of July. July 4th is the 185th day on the Georgian calendar, unless it's a leap year, and then it's the 186th. Historically, it has most often been a Monday, Wednesday, or a Saturday. Of course, to Americans though, July the 4th is an important date because of what happened in our first entry. And that's number 10. 1776, Declaration of Independence is adopted. The American Revolutionary War started in 1775, and when it began, many of the American colonists did not want to have complete independence from Britain, and those who did were considered radical. However, throughout the year, those sentiments changed drastically. On July 6, 1776, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee put forth a motion to break from Britain and for the colonies to be independent. Voting was postponed until July 2nd, and then the Continental Congress nearly unanimously voted for independence. There was only one holdout, and that was New York. They abstained, and then they later voted for independence. 2 days after the vote, the Declaration of Independence, which was mostly written by Thomas Jefferson, was officially adopted, and July the 4th became a day of celebration, even though several of the Founding Fathers thought that July the 2nd was actually a more accurate date to celebrate America's independence. This includes President John Adams, who was known to turn down invitations for festivities that happened on July the 4th. July the 4th was made an official holiday in 1941, and of course it is still celebrated annually with festivities and fireworks throughout the country. Number 9. Westpoint Opens. The idea to establish a military academy to specifically train military personnel in the United States was first proposed by George Washington in 1783. Others rejected the idea because they thought it was too European and thought it might be a danger to democracy because it could create a militant class that could overpower the government. As a result of the opposition, it would take nearly 20 years to open America's first military academy, and that was West Point. Officially called the United States' Military Academy, West Point was founded on March 16, 1808, and is located in Orange County, New York, poised above the Hudson River. The school officially opened its doors on July 4, 1802. The school was for apprentice military engineers, and in 1812 it expanded to educate 250 students, and they developed a 4-year curriculum. West Point has been open ever since, making it one of the oldest military academies in the world. Number 8. 1826. President John Adams and President Thomas Jefferson die. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson are two of the 7 key founding fathers of America, and both strongly believed in freedom and democracy, but they completely differed on how to achieve these goals. This eventually led to a rivalry between the two men. Adams, who was the first vice president, became the second president of the United States in 1797 and held the office until 1801. He wanted a strong central government, while Jefferson, who preceded Adams as president and served from 1801 to 1809, wanted the states to have more rights and for the federal government to have minimal involvement. After their tenures as president, the former allies and then rivals revived their friendship. It started with a letter dated January 1, 1812, from Adams to Jefferson, wishing him a happy new year. The men corresponded until their deaths, which both happened on July 4, 1826. This was 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Adams, who was 90 years old, died first, and his last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives. He was right, but only for about 5 hours. That's when Jefferson passed away. He was aged 84. Amazingly, these are not the only presidents to die on July 4th. The 5th president of the United States, James Monroe, died 5 years later on July 4th, 1831. Number 7. 1862. Lewis Carroll first tells the story of Alice in Wonderland. Born Charles Lutwidge Dodgson on January 27, 1832 in Desbury, Cheshire in England, Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, logician, and most notably a writer. His most famous piece of work is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was published in 1865. The story of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was inspired by 10-year-old Alice Liddell, who was the first daughter of Henry George Liddell, Dean of Christ Church. Carroll had befriended Alice and her siblings like he had befriended other children before her. When Alice and her sister spent time with Carroll, he would tell them some fantastical stories. On July 4th, 1862, Carroll took Alice and her 2 sisters on a boating picnic, and he told them a story about a girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole and lands in a magical place called Wonderland. Alice loved the story, and she demanded that he write it out. He did, and 3 years later it was published. It was a huge success, and it's also credited with launching modern children's literature. Also, for fans of Carroll and his magnum opus, July 4th is also considered Alice's day. Number 6. 1879. The Anglo-Zulu War ends. The Zulu kingdom saw massive growth under the leadership of Shaka, who became chief of the tribe in 1816. When he became chief, the Zulus' population was about 1,500, but at its peak there were over 10 million citizens, and they lived in what is today the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal. Shaka was ultimately killed in 1828 by his half-brothers because he went insane. 50 years later, in 1878, the British wanted to take over Zulu lands for several reasons. The first is that they wanted the population to work in their diamond fields, and they wanted to make an African federation which would destroy other autonomous African nations. So, on December 11, 1878, they gave the Zulus an ultimatum that would have been impossible for them to meet. For example, the Zulus had 30 days to dismantle their army and give up major aspects of their culture. The British invasion began on July 11, 1879, and throughout the war there were several bloody battles. The problem the Zulus had was that they didn't manufacture their own guns, so they were completely outweaponed. Nearly 6 months after the war started on July 4, 1879, the British stormed the Zulu capital, Ulundi, and they defeated the last of the Zulu warriors, signaling the end of the Anglo-Zulu War. Number 5. 1884. France transfers ownership of the Statue of Liberty to the United States. The most common story about the Statue of Liberty is that it was a gift from the French government to the American government, but that's a bit of an oversimplification. What really happened is that the French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi got the idea from Edward Laboulaye, who was the chairman of the French Anti-Slavery Society, who suggested it at a dinner party in 1865. 2 years would go by, and during that time, Bartholdi came up with the design of the Statue of Liberty, but he originally pitched it to Egypt to be built alongside the Suez Canal. The deal ultimately fell through. Bartholdi then decided that his statue should be used as a gift to the Americans, and he tried to get money from the French government to construct it, but they weren't interested. So Bartholdi started to fundraise money to build it on his own. After construction started in 1876, Bartholdi sold tickets to see the construction of the statue in his workshop, and he sold souvenirs to fund the project. It was only halfway through construction that the French government swooped in and ensured the rest of the funding. In a ceremony on July 4, 1884, the French government offered the statue to American ambassador Levi P. Morton. They even offered a warship to ship the statue to the United States, and they would cover the cost. Morton, on behalf of the American government, accepted the statue. The Statue of Liberty arrived at Bedloes Island on the 17th of June, 1885, and it was officially unveiled on October 28, 1886. Number 4. 1938. Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day. Lou Gehrig was born on June 9, 1903 in Manhattan, New York. His parents had 4 children, but he was the only one to survive infancy. He grew up in poverty with an alcoholic father and a mother who worked several jobs to support the family. From a young age, Gehrig showed signs that he was an excellent athlete, and he played both baseball and football. He ended up signing with the New York Yankees in April 1923. On June 15, 1923, he played his first game at first base for the Yankees, and he continued to play every game for the next 15 seasons. During that time, he was consistently one of the best hitters in the game. He also helped lead the Yankees to 6 World Series titles, and he was named American League MVP in 1927 and 1936. Then, in 1938, Gehrig had his first subpar year. At first, Gehrig and many other people thought that he was just losing his edge. After all, he was 35 years old and had played a lot of professional baseball during 15 of those years. Gehrig started the 1939 season, but he had to bench himself on May 2nd, 1939 due to poor play, and then he sat out the next game, which ended his consecutive game streak, which was 2,130 at this point. In June 1939, Gehrig flew to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. On his 36th birthday, he learned that he had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Not long after the diagnosis, he retired from baseball. On July 4th of that year, Yankee Stadium, which opened the same year that Gehrig signed with the team, held Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day. Over 60,000 fans attended the doubleheader game between the Yankees and the Washington Senators. In between the games, they held a tribute for Gehrig, where he gave his famous speech that started with the lines,
"The past 2 weeks, you've been reading about a bad brag. Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Gehrig died 2 years later on June 2nd, 1941. His consecutive game streak would stand for 56 years until Cal Ripken Jr. broke it in 1995. Number 3. 1950. Radio Free Europe first broadcasts. Radio Free Europe was first conceived during the early days of the Cold War by George F. Kennan, who was with the United States Department of State, and Frank G. Wisner, who was a member of the Office of Political Coordination, which later became the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Their plan was to broadcast news through radio signals into countries behind the Iron Curtain. Radio Free Europe was first broadcast on July 4, 1950 from Munich, West Germany, into Czechoslovakia. A short time later, their broadcast was translated into 15 different languages and transmitted into other countries behind the Iron Curtain. In 1951, Radio Liberty was launched, and it specifically targeted the Soviet Union, while Radio Free Europe continued to target satellite countries. Obviously, the communist governments didn't like this and often tried to jam the radio signals and even bombed the stations. But in the end, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty proved to be the victor. Former President of the Czech Republic Václav Havel and former Russian President Boris Yeltsin both credit Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty with helping to end the Cold War. Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty are one entity today, and it broadcasts in 23 countries in 26 languages, including Russia, Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan, just to name a few. Number 2, 1966. President Lyndon Johnson signs the Freedom of Information Act. The first person to champion the Freedom of Information Act was a Democratic congressman named John Moss from California. He introduced it in 1955 as a way to create more transparency in the government. It found support from newspaper editors and journalists, but not many people in the government liked it. Specifically, Moss couldn't find a Republican to co-sponsor the bill. For many years, Moss campaigned, and finally, in 1966, he found a co-sponsor, a young Republican congressman named Donald Rumsfeld. On June 20th, 1966, the House passed the Freedom of Information Act by a vote of 307 to 0. The problem was that Lyndon Johnson didn't want to sign it, but if he didn't sign it, it would look like he was hiding something. So on July 4th, 1966, Johnson signed it in private at his Texas ranch instead of having a ceremony to mark the occasion. Today, the Freedom of Information Act is still an instrumental tool in keeping the government transparent. There is a good chance that if you read a big news story involving the government, you'll read something to the effect of, according to documents obtained due to the Freedom of Information Act. Number 1, 1996. The Mars Pathfinder lands on Mars. On December 4th, 1996, at 1:58 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, NASA launched the Mars Pathfinder from Cape Canaveral, Florida. It had an uneventful journey, and it landed on the Ares-Vallis plain of Mars on July 4th, 1997. On board the Pathfinder was the Sojourner rover. The Sojourner became the first vehicle to operate outside of the Earth and the Moon. The last signal from Pathfinder was received on September 27th, 1997, and the results of the Pathfinder mission, that was 2.7 billion bits of information about Mars, was sent back to Earth. This included 16,500 pictures and 8.5 million measurements of atmospheric pressure, temperature, and wind speed. The Pathfinder, which was renamed the Sagan Memorial Station after astronomer Carl Sagan, is a major milestone in what some experts believe is our inevitable journey to Mars. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and as always, thank you for watching.